In this video, we're going to look at the female reproductive tract, so it's more the tubes that we're looking at. So first, the uterine tubes, also known as the fallopian tubes. Those are going to be the connection between the ovaries and the uterus. So the ovaries ovulate the secondary oocyte, and the uterine tubes is where fertilization has to occur for a pregnancy to occur. The uterine tubes are lined with cilia because they're going to help move things along. And we have a part that's called the infundibulum. So that's going to be the we have the ovary, and we have the widening and the catching part of the uterine tube. The finger-like projections that drape over the ovary and catch the secondary oocyte after it's been ovulated is called the fimbriae. So those are little fingers. They're not directly connected to the ovary. They just kind of drape on top of it so that we can catch the secondary oocyte after it's been ovulated. All of this is going to have cilia, again, because it's going to help the movement of the secondary oocyte to go towards the uterine cavity. And then if it's fertilized, then once kind of the division in the beginning, dividing parts of after fertilization, so it goes zygote, then it goes blastocyst. We don't need to know that. But basically, fertilization occurs and then quick division occurs before it reaches the uterus. But we need help with movement with cilia during that whole entire process. So looking at drawing, so here is the infundibulum, so the widening part, with the fimbriae, the projections that are draped across the ovary to catch the oocytes that are ovulated. Then kind of the second part after this large funnel kind of going around the corner is called the ampulla. It's kind of the middle section. Once we're getting close to the actual uterus, that is the isthmus. So you can see here, kind of saw the isthmus, the ampulla, infundibulum, and the fimbriae. This is just showing you that there's cilia, large amount of cilia all along here, because the oocyte needs to go from here. If it's fertilized or if it's not, then needs to move into the uterine cavity. So we need help with movement. But there's also a lot of smooth muscle surrounding it. So we're also going to have peristaltic movements and help with moving the oocyte as well. So oocyte transport, again, part ciliary, part peristaltic, smooth muscle contraction in the uterine tube. So remember peristalsis, we contract behind something, we move it forward, then we contract, and relax and contract. So it's that combination of slowly squeezing the oocyte towards the uterus. It takes about 3 or 4 days for a secondary oocyte to go from the infundibulum, so that widening part, the beginning part of the uterine tube draped on the ovary, to get through the uterine tube to go to the uterus. Fertilization has to happen in the uterine tubes or the fallopian tubes. So that usually has to happen between 12 and 24 hours. So the oocyte's still in the uterine tube. Again, fertilization occurs, and then we're going to have multiple steps of division before it gets to the uterus. The uterus is going to be major layer, is going to be the muscular layer. And the function of that is to protect, to feed, and to remove waste of either an embryo, which we consider 1 to 8 weeks is an embryo. Greater than 8 weeks, we call it a fetus. And so we kind of support the embryo and then the fetus until childbirth, where then the uterus contracts strongly to deliver the baby. Looking at the layers of the uterus, Metrium is having to do with the uterus, and peri meaning around. So this is around the uterus. This is the outer layer. So you can see outer layers right here. That can be continuous with peritoneal lining. So visceral peritoneum as well can kind of continue with the perimetrium. The middle layer, remember MYO has to do with muscle. So this is the muscular layer of the uterus. So it's smooth muscle, we can't control it. And that's where the forceful contractions occur for delivering a baby. So when we have contractions and actually pushing a baby out is going to be in the myometrium, and it's the thickest layer. So you can see here is the perimetrium. Then all of this is the myometrium. The third layer, again, metrium means uterus, and then endo means inside. So the third layer is the one that changes. So it grows and shrinks based on the uterine cycle. So this is going to be what's sloughed off during menstruation and then grown back and then sloughed off depending on what's occurring each month. So this changes with the uterine cycle and has kind of changing various levels of glands and things that we'll talk about later. So that's this layer right here. So again, perimetrium, outer layer, myometrium, middle layer, endometrium, inner layer. Now looking at the vessels of the uterine layers. So first the uterine artery comes in, penetrates the perimetrium, goes through the myometrium, and starts arcing out in the middle of the myometrium. So you can see here that we started doing and the arcuate arteries that are going kind of on arches that are surrounding in the middle of the myometrium that are leading to supply the endometrium. Then the radial arteries are coming off the arcuates that are going into the endometrium, which is right here. So endometrium, perimetrium, little tiny, or myometrium, endometrium, myometrium, little tiny perimetrium. With the radial arteries, then we also have straight arteries. So once we're getting into, so this would be the myometrium, so this is going to be a radial artery here. Then we have straight arteries that are going to supply the basal layer or the layer closest to the myometrium. So the straight arteries are going to be all supplying this layer. Then we lead to a spiral artery, which is this curly Q coming up here. That's going to supply the functional layer. That's going to be where uterine glands are, and this is going to be the area that is growing and then sloughed off during menstruation. So the basal layer stays around because we need some place for it to regenerate from. So this is lost, and then we can regrow from here. So that's why we say it's the functional layer, because that's going to be where the glands are, and that's what's going to change during the cycle. So looking at it again, perimetrium, the uterine artery goes in the perimetrium. In the myometrium goes to arcuate arteries, leads to radial arteries, goes into the endometrium. These guys are going to be your straight arteries in the basal layer of your endometrium. And these are going to be your spiral arteries. Now looking at the uterine cycle. So we've gone over the ovarian cycle, and these are happening simultaneously based on changes in sex hormones. So this is going to be in response to estrogen and progesterone mainly. So we saw the ovaries are making more levels of estrogen when the follicles are increasing. So remember, theca cells and the granulosa cells are making estrogen. And then we get to the corpus luteum and progesterone's mainly being made. So we'll see differences because of these hormone level changes. So uterine cycle is about 28 days. Average, each individual female is going to have kind of their normal cycle. Can average or range from 21 days to 35 days. First menarche is going to be between 11 and 15 years of age, depends on genetics, nutrition, a whole host of things. And then continues to menopause, which is usually around 45 to 55 years. The uterine cycle can be affected by a lot of things: malnutrition, severe stress, and even chronic illness. So, sickness can happen. Obviously, if pregnancy is occurring, we're not having a normal menstrual period and uterine cycle. So, day one of the uterine cycle is actually menstruation. So, the first day of menstruation is day one of the uterine cycle. That's when, again, the functional zone is degenerating and lost. What happens is we constrict those spiral arteries. So this is why, so we had the straight arteries that are going to be in the basal layer, and then we had the spiral arteries that are in the functional layer. Well, if we cut off blood supply because we constrict these, then all of this tissue out here is going to die because we need blood supply, oxygen, nutrition to supply this tissue. So constricting or stopping the blood supply to this layer is going to lead to the endometrial sloughing. So you lose this layer, and that's menstruation, lost through the vagina. It lasts about 1 to 7 days. Again, this changes based on individual cycle. We're just talking about a 28-day cycle here. And some blood, so we're constricting, we're not completely stopping all blood flow or blood loss. We're just severely constricting it. So some blood can be lost during menstruation in about 35 to 50 mils. After menstruation, we come to the proliferative phase. And this is coming in, so proliferative phase is occurring during the follicular phase in the ovary. So the major hormone that we're going to be seeing is estrogen. So then we have the basal layer of the endometrium is going to start dividing, and it's going to start replacing the functional layer of the endometrium. So estrogen, again, developing ovarian follicles, as they develop, the estrogen levels are increasing, and that's what's stimulating the basal layer to regenerate the functional layer. We also remake uterine glands, and they start to make glycogen-rich mucus. Glycogen, remember, is a chain of glucose. We store it in our muscle, we store it in our liver. So we can break down glycogen to glucose to use to make ATP and use to make for energy. So uterine glands making this mucus can be used by an early embryo if fertilization does occur. So it can be used for an early embryo for divisions taking a lot of energy. So it'll be able to provide energy. The last phase is called the secretory phase. And this is coinciding with the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. This is when progesterone is going to be high, and still we have estrogens, but progesterone is going to be the main one. We're going to make those glands larger. They're going to start making even more things. So, not just glycogen, they're going to make proteins as well to help support a potential embryo coming. The spiral arteries are going to get larger and go further into the functional layer. And so this phase, so the secretory phase, the proliferative phase is the follicular phase. After ovulation, when we have a corpus luteum, then that's when the uterus changes into the secretory phase as well. So you can see there's a lot of large glands here, a lot thicker. Gets larger. So you can see kind of all the changes that are happening because what's happening, you've ovulated, you're waiting for potential fertilization to occur in the uterine tubes. So you're preparing for fertilization to occur and then implantation.